Have you ever wondered whether every single person you meet truly has a soul? On the surface, the answer feels obvious: of course they do. But when you look more deeply, the picture becomes less clear. Think of the people you've encountered in your life. Some radiate kindness and warmth effortlessly, while others, though outwardly successful or even charismatic, feel strangely hollow, like there's no inner spark. Edgar Cayce, often called the sleeping prophet, offered a perspective that reshapes this question. He taught that the soul is universal. Every human being carries a divine spark that connects them to God or the source of life itself. But he also suggested something more subtle: just because the soul is present doesn't mean it is active or awake. Cayce described cases where the soul seemed buried under layers of fear, ego, pain, or disconnection. These individuals weren't soulless monsters, as some might assume, but rather people who had lost touch with their deeper essence. Their soul still existed, it was simply dormant, waiting to be remembered. This idea raises a profound challenge. Instead of asking, "Does this person have a soul?" the real question might be, "Is their soul shining through? And by extension, is mine?" Because recognizing whether the soul is awake or asleep isn't about judging others, it's about learning how to recognize the signs of life within ourselves and in those we meet. The first sign: selfless empathy. For Cayce, one of the clearest signs that a soul is awake is the ability to truly feel another person's pain, not out of pity or obligation, but as if that suffering were your own. This is more than sympathy, which often comes from the mind. It is empathy that flows directly from the heart. He explained that the soul is not an abstract concept or a poetic idea. It is a living presence that naturally responds to life around it. When you encounter someone in distress, the awakened soul resonates instantly, without calculation. It's almost as if the soul recognizes itself in another being. On the other hand, when a person has lost touch with their inner essence, something different happens. They may pass by suffering without noticing, or worse, without caring. Cayce suggested that this lack of resonance is not because the soul is missing, but because it has been pushed into silence. Over time, resentment, fear, and self-centeredness can bury the inner spark so deeply that little light shines through. Think about it in everyday terms. You've probably met people who seem mechanical, going through life on autopilot. Their actions are functional, but they lack warmth. Compare that to those rare individuals whose presence alone makes you feel seen and safe. That contrast, according to Cayce, is the difference between a soul asleep and a soul awake. The takeaway here is important: empathy isn't just a personality trait, it's a spiritual signal. It shows us whether the deepest part of ourselves is alive and active. And the more we practice opening to others, the brighter that inner light becomes. The second sign: the thirst for truth. According to Cayce, another unmistakable sign of a living soul is the inner drive to seek truth. Not just facts, statistics, or opinions, but truth in its purest form. This search is different from curiosity for information, it's a deeper longing to understand what lies beneath the surface of life. People whose souls are awake often carry this quiet hunger. They might not call themselves philosophers or mystics, and they don't always announce their search. Some may work in ordinary jobs, teachers, drivers, parents, yet behind their daily roles is a restless heart that keeps asking, "What's real? What's behind all this?" Cayce described this yearning as the whisper of the soul. It doesn't shout or demand attention, but it refuses to be silenced. A person guided by this inner compass begins to sense that life isn't just a chain of physical events. There is something larger, something invisible, calling to them. This thirst for truth can manifest in many ways: a pull toward spiritual study, deep reflection, or simply a dissatisfaction with superficial answers. Have you ever noticed how certain people's eyes seem to carry more depth, as though they're looking beyond what's visible? That, Cayce suggested, is the mark of the soul seeking truth. The key point is this: the soul's thirst isn't about gathering knowledge to feel superior or powerful. It's about aligning with reality as it is, stripping away illusions to touch what's eternal. And once this search begins, it rarely stops. The soul doesn't settle for surface explanations because it remembers there's more. The third sign, inner honesty. Cayce emphasized that an awakened soul cannot live comfortably in lies, especially self-deception. While everyone makes mistakes or stumbles in life, those connected to their soul tend to face their flaws directly rather than hide behind masks. This doesn't mean such people are perfect or always good. Instead, it means they value authenticity over appearances. They may admit when they're wrong, confess when they don't know the answer, or acknowledge when they're struggling. The difference lies in their refusal to pretend. The soul, Cayce said, naturally pushes toward truth, even when it's painful. Think of someone you've met who radiates a quiet kind of realness. They don't have to convince you they're spiritual or wise, you simply feel their sincerity. Even in silence, there's a sense of alignment between their inner world and their outer actions. That's the soul shining through. By contrast, when the soul is asleep, people often rely on roles, masks, and manipulation to navigate the world. They may say the right words or perform the expected actions, but something feels off, like a stage performance without genuine presence. Cayce suggested that authenticity is magnetic because it resonates with our own inner truth. When we encounter someone who is deeply honest with themselves, it stirs something within us, reminding us that we too long to drop our disguises. Ultimately, inner honesty is not just about moral virtue. It's about spiritual alignment. It's the refusal to betray your own essence. And when you live in that space, even quietly, others can feel it, because the soul doesn't need to prove itself. It simply is. The fourth sign, spontaneous compassion. The final sign Cayce highlighted is spontaneous compassion, the kind that arises naturally, without effort or calculation. It isn't about doing good because it looks virtuous, or because society expects it. It's the inner impulse to help simply because you cannot walk away from another being's suffering. According to Cayce, the soul recognizes itself in all forms of life. When it sees pain, it doesn't analyze whether the person deserves comfort. It responds instinctively, as though caring for a part of its own being. This kind of compassion doesn't need recognition or reward, it flows quietly, often unnoticed. We've all seen this in action: someone offering kindness to a stranger, a child comforting a friend without being told, or a person giving time and energy even when they have little to spare. These moments reveal the soul at work, breaking through the layers of ego and self-interest. In contrast, when compassion is missing, life begins to feel mechanical. People may interact efficiently but without warmth. They may help only when convenient, or when there's something to gain. Cayce warned that this indifference signals the soul's silence, not its absence. What makes spontaneous compassion so powerful is that it often awakens others. A single act of genuine care can stir something forgotten in the hearts of those who witness it. In this way, compassion is contagious, it spreads light without needing words. For Cayce, compassion wasn't weakness. It was the strongest evidence of the divine spark alive within us. And when it appears, it reminds us of who we truly are, not isolated individuals, but interconnected souls. Edgar Cayce often spoke about souls not being lost, but rather asleep. What he meant is that the divine spark within us never disappears, it only becomes buried under the noise of material life. When we become absorbed by survival, ambition, or distractions, the soul's voice grows faint. It doesn't vanish, but it's easy to mistake its silence for absence. A sleeping soul shows itself in subtle ways. Life may feel repetitive and hollow, no matter how many accomplishments are achieved. Relationships can become transactional rather than deeply connected. People in this state often describe themselves as numb or going through the motions. From Cayce's perspective, this numbness isn't a psychological failure, it's a spiritual forgetting. Yet the good news is that awakening is always possible. The soul doesn't hold grudges, it waits patiently for recognition. Cayce suggested that awakening often begins with small shifts, moments of awe in nature, an act of kindness that touches the heart, or even deep suffering that strips away illusions. These experiences shake us out of autopilot and make us ask, is there more to life than this? One of the most effective practices Cayce recommended was cultivating awareness in daily life. He taught that prayer, meditation, and reflection could tune the mind to hear the soul again. Even simple acts, pausing before making a choice, noticing beauty in the ordinary, or practicing gratitude, can begin to stir the inner self. Importantly, Cayce emphasized that awakening is not a one-time event but a continual process. Just as we wake each morning and may drift into sleep at night, the soul's awareness also ebbs and flows. The challenge is to recognize when we are drifting and gently return to the center. Perhaps the most hopeful part of Cayce's teaching is this: the soul never truly forgets who it is. Even in the deepest slumber, its memory of the divine remains intact. Awakening is less about becoming something new, and more about remembering what has always been true, that we are, at our core, eternal beings temporarily walking the human path. Edgar Cayce believed that individual awakening was never just personal, it rippled outward into families, communities, and eventually the whole world. He described humanity as a collective soul, where each person's growth contributes to a larger spiritual evolution. When more individuals awaken, society itself begins to transform. According to Cayce, this global awakening isn't about everyone agreeing on religion, philosophy, or politics. Instead, it's about remembering a shared truth, that we are spiritual beings first, and material beings second. When that awareness becomes widespread, competition softens, compassion increases, and humanity naturally begins to build systems that honor life rather than exploit it. He hinted that the turbulence of the modern world, wars, inequality, environmental crises, are not just accidents of history but part of the growing pains of awakening. Just as an individual may go through trials before their soul fully awakens, humanity as a whole experiences challenges that push it toward higher awareness. Cayce was clear: awakening is not a passive process. It requires active participation. Each time someone chooses empathy over indifference, or forgiveness over resentment, they help shift the balance of the collective. Small choices matter, because they add to the spiritual weight of humanity's direction. He also warned that resistance to awakening is natural. Old systems of power, built on fear and division, will not dissolve quietly. Yet, the more people listen to the call of their souls, the less grip those systems will have. For Cayce, the global shift was not a prophecy of doom but a vision of hope. He believed humanity stood at a crossroads where awakening souls could tip the scale toward a future defined by cooperation, healing, and deeper understanding of our place in the universe. In other words, the awakening of your soul is not just about you, it is a contribution to the greatest transformation humanity has ever known. One of Edgar Cayce's most radical teachings, especially for his time, was the reality of reincarnation. He explained that the soul's awakening is not confined to a single lifetime. Instead, each incarnation is like a chapter in a much larger story, with lessons carried forward until they are fully learned. According to Cayce, every soul chooses the circumstances of its birth with purpose. Families, cultures, and even hardships are not accidents but opportunities to continue the process of awakening. A soul that fails to grow in one life is not punished, it is simply given another chance to remember its divine origin. He taught that soul awakening often happens in waves. In one lifetime, a person may struggle with ego, selfishness, or fear. In the next, they may be drawn toward compassion, wisdom, or service. These tendencies are not random, they are echoes of choices made before. What we awaken to now becomes the foundation of who we are later. For Cayce, this continuity of consciousness explained why some people seem old souls. They carry an inner wisdom that feels beyond their years because they have already walked many paths, endured many trials, and gathered countless insights. But reincarnation is not about endlessly repeating cycles. Its purpose is growth toward a final goal, reunion with the divine. Each awakening, no matter how small, brings the soul closer to that ultimate fulfillment. Perhaps most importantly, Cayce emphasized that remembering our eternal nature frees us from fear. If life is a single shot, mistakes seem catastrophic. But if life is one step on a long journey, every experience, even failure, becomes meaningful. Awakening across lifetimes gives our struggles depth and our victories context. In this way, the awakening soul is not racing against time, it is unfolding in perfect rhythm, guided by a wisdom larger than any single lifetime could contain. For Edgar Cayce, awakening was not meant to remain a lofty idea or mystical experience. It had to be lived out in the ordinary rhythm of daily life. He often reminded people that the soul reveals itself not through grand gestures, but through consistent, small choices made with awareness. Cayce encouraged starting with the simplest practices: kindness in speech, honesty in action, and mindfulness in relationships. He stressed that every interaction is a spiritual opportunity. The way we treat a stranger, the patience we show in conflict, or the gratitude we express at the end of the day, all of these are expressions of an awakened soul. Prayer and meditation were central in his teachings. These moments of quiet were not about escaping the world but tuning inward, aligning the mind with the soul's higher purpose. Even 5 minutes of stillness, Cayce suggested, could recalibrate a person's energy and help them respond to life with clarity rather than reaction. Service was another key. He believed that the awakened soul naturally seeks to uplift others, whether through teaching, healing, or simply offering a listening ear. In Cayce's words, the soul grows by giving. Generosity, when given freely, not only blesses others but strengthens our own connection to the divine. Most importantly, Cayce emphasized persistence. Awakening is not a perfect, straight path, it's a process of falling asleep and waking again, sometimes many times in one day. The goal is not to avoid mistakes but to keep returning to the center, again and again, with humility and faith. In short, to live as an awakened soul is to bring spiritual awareness into the very fabric of ordinary life, turning daily routines into sacred opportunities to express the light within. As we reach the end of Cayce's vision, the 4 signs of an awakened soul: inner restlessness, longing for truth, recognition of oneness, and spontaneous compassion, form a kind of spiritual compass. They remind us that awakening isn't a single event but a living process that deepens across lifetimes and ripples through humanity as a whole. Cayce saw this journey not as an abstract idea but as humanity's true destiny. He believed that each soul is like a spark of the divine, meant to grow brighter until it reunites fully with its source. Awakening, then, is the gradual uncovering of what we already are. This path also carries profound responsibility. Our choices, whether in thoughts, words, or deeds, are not insignificant. Each act of kindness, each moment of honesty, each decision to live in alignment with the soul adds momentum to the global shift. In this way, personal awakening contributes directly to collective evolution. Cayce often reassured seekers that the divine plan is not one of fear but of hope. Even when the world seems divided or chaotic, the awakening of countless souls is quietly shaping a different future, one defined not by power and greed, but by cooperation, healing, and love. The greatest takeaway from Cayce's message is simple: your awakening matters. No matter where you are on the path, no step is wasted. Every spark of compassion, every moment of awareness, every choice to remember your divine nature is part of a much larger unfolding. In the end, Cayce's vision offers both challenge and comfort. The challenge is to live consciously, with the courage to follow the soul's call. The comfort is knowing that this journey leads not to loss, but to fulfillment, the realization that we are, and always have been, eternal beings on a sacred path home. If this exploration of Edgar Cayce's wisdom spoke to your heart, take a moment to support the channel by liking this video and subscribing. By doing so, you're not only helping us grow, you're also joining a community of seekers who are awakening together. Share this video with someone you feel is ready to hear these truths, and let's continue spreading light in a world that deeply needs it.